"Do you know the difference between a victim and a weapon?" Magnus whispered, the cold steel of the blade pressing against my palm, not my throat. "A victim waits for the blow. A weapon delivers it." I looked at him, not with fear, but with a terrifying hunger I didn't know I possessed. My father gave me to this monster to clear a debt, expecting me to break. He didn't realize he was handing a loaded gun to the only man who knew how to pull the trigger. Welcome to a story of betrayal, blood, and a romance that burns hotter than gunpowder. This as she was given to a mafia boss as punishment, then became his deadliest weapon. The air in the warehouse was stagnant, dry, and smelled faintly of ozone and old dust. There was no dramatic storm outside, no thunder to mask the beating of Marcus Cross's heart. Just the relentless, blinding glare of industrial floodlights humming overhead, casting long, sharp shadows that looked like knife wounds against the concrete floor. Thalia Cross stood 3 feet behind her father. She didn't tremble. She didn't weep. She stood with the stillness of a statue carved from ice, her eyes fixed on the man sitting in the single leather chair in the center of the vast, empty space. Magnus Fairchild. He was younger than the story suggested. The rumors painted him as a scarred brute, a creature of blunt force. The man in the chair was elegant, almost terrifyingly so. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than the building they were standing in, and his face was a mask of bored intelligence. He was flipping through a ledger, her father's ledger, with long, pianist's fingers. "The math is creative, Marcus," Magnus said. His voice was soft, a baritone that didn't need to shout to command the oxygen in the room. "But creativity doesn't fill the $4 million hole in my accounts." Marcus Cross, a man who had spent his life bullying his daughter and cowing to his superiors, was sweating profusely. "It's a liquidity issue, Mr. Fairchild. The assets are there. I just need time, another month." Magnus closed the book. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. "You had a month. You spent it trying to book a flight to the Caymans. My associates intercepted the reservation before you could hit confirm." Marcus's knees buckled. He grasped at the air, looking for a lifeline. His eyes darted wildly until they landed on Thalia. Thalia felt a cold pit form in her stomach. She knew that look. It was the look of a rat cornered by a viper, willing to throw its own young to distract the predator. "Her!" Marcus stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Thalia. "Take her!" Magnus paused. He didn't look at Thalia immediately. He looked at Marcus with profound disgust. "You want to settle a $4 million theft by trading human flesh? Do I look like a pimp to you, Marcus?" No, she's brilliant," Marcus babbled, desperation making his voice shrill. "She knows the books. She knows the codes. She has an eidetic memory. She's collateral. Until I get the money. Keep her. Use her. Punishment, leverage, whatever you want, she's yours." Thalia's jaw tightened. She didn't scream. "Daddy, no!" She didn't beg. Instead, her mind, sharpened by years of navigating her father's drunken volatility, went into survival mode. She analyzed the room. 4 guards, 2 by the exit, 2 flanking Magnus, all armed with semi-automatics. Magnus was unarmed or appeared to be. The distance between her and the nearest exit was 40 feet. Impossible. Magnus finally shifted his gaze. He looked past Marcus, locking eyes with Thalia. She expected lust. She expected the predatory leer she had seen on her father's business associates for years. Instead, she saw curiosity. Cold, clinical curiosity. It was like being examined by a surgeon deciding where to make the first incision. "Come here," Magnus commanded. Thalia stepped around her father, moving with a fluid grace that seemed out of place in the grimy warehouse. She stopped 2 feet from Magnus. "Do you belong to him?" Magnus asked, gesturing vaguely at her father. "I belong to myself," Thalia said. Her voice was steady, surprising even her. "But he holds the deed to the house and my identity documents. He says you have a memory." "I remember everything," Thalia said, "including the fact that your left guard has a limp he's trying to hide, and your right guard checked his watch 3 times in the last minute, implying he has somewhere else to be. Unprofessional." The guard to the right stiffened. Magnus's lips quirked, a microscopic smile. He stood up. He was tall, looming over her, radiating a heat and power that made the air feel thin. He walked around her, inspecting her not as a woman, but as an object of potential value. Your father thinks he is giving me a hostage, Magnus said to the room, though his eyes were on hers. He thinks if he gives me his daughter, I won't skin him alive for his theft. Magnus turned back to Marcus. Get out. Marcus blinked, stunned. We have a deal? Leave her. Go. If you aren't in the city limits by sunrise, I will find you. Marcus didn't hesitate. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't apologize. He scrambled backward, turned, and ran toward the exit, the heavy metal doors clanging shut behind him. Thalia was alone with the wolves. Why didn't you cry? Magnus asked, leaning back against the edge of his chair, crossing his arms. Most women would be screaming. Would it change anything? Thalia asked. No. Then it's a waste of energy. Magnus stared at her for a long moment. He gave you to me as punishment. For you or for him? I wonder. He thinks I'm going to break you. Thalia lifted her chin. Are you? Magnus stepped closer, intruding on her personal space, forcing her to tilt her head back. His eyes were the color of burnt amber. I don't break things, Miss Cross. I fix them, or I repurpose them. Your father saw a bargaining chip. I see raw material. He signaled to his guards. Bring the car. We're going to the spire. What am I to you? Thalia demanded, refusing to move until he answered. Magnus paused, looking at her with that same unnerving intensity. Currently, you are a debt unpaid. But you noticed the guard's limp. You noticed the time. You have eyes that actually see. That is rare. He extended a hand. It wasn't a gentleman's gesture. It was a challenge. Come, Thalia. Let's see if you survive the night. She looked at his hand, then at the door her father had fled through. The world she knew was gone. She took Magnus's hand. His grip was iron, hot and dry. I'll survive, she whispered. I always do. The drive was silent. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows of the armored SUV, a streak of neon bleeding into the night. There was no fog, just the crisp, relentless clarity of a cold urban winter. Thalia sat on the opposite side of the leather bench from Magnus. He had opened a laptop and was typing, seemingly ignoring her. But Thalia knew better. She could feel his awareness of her, like a static charge in the air. She studied him. He wasn't the typical mob boss depicted in movies. He didn't wear gold chains. He didn't smell of cigars. He smelled of sandalwood and something sharper, like ink or cold metal. He was precise. The car ascended the private ramp of the spire, the tallest residential building in the city. It was a monolith of black glass and steel piercing the sky. We are here, Magnus said, closing his laptop as the car came to a smooth halt in a private garage that looked more like a museum showroom. Vintage cars sat on rotating platforms under spotlights. He led her to a private elevator. There were no buttons, only a biometric scanner. He placed his hand on the panel, and the doors hissed open. The penthouse was vast. It was an open-concept fortress of floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lay sprawled beneath them, a grid of electricity and corruption. The furniture was sparse, modern, and expensive. It felt less like a home and more like an observation deck for a god looking down on insects. The East Wing is yours, Magnus said, walking toward a bar cart made of chrome and crystal. He poured a single glass of amber liquid. He didn't offer her one. You are not a prisoner in the traditional sense. The doors are locked from the outside, yes, but you have access to the library, the gym, and the kitchen. Do not enter my office. Do not enter the North Wing. Thalia stood in the center of the living room, feeling the sheer scale of the space pressing down on her. And what am I supposed to do here? Wait for you to decide my fate? Magnus took a sip of his drink, watching her over the rim of the glass. You are supposed to exist. Your father owes me $4 million. Until that is repaid, you are the interest. But I have no use for a concubine, Thalia. Boredom is the enemy of intellect. He walked over to a sleek glass table and picked up a tablet. He tapped the screen and tossed it into the sofa next to her. What is this? She asked. Your father's accounts, the real ones, the ones he thought he hid. Thalia picked up the tablet. Rows of numbers, shell companies, and offshore transfers filled the screen. Why are you showing me this? You said you have an eidetic memory. You said you know the codes. Magnus's eyes narrowed. Prove it. Find where he buried the rest of the money. If you find it, I might consider that a payment toward his debt. And if I don't, then you remain ornamental, and useless things eventually get discarded. Thalia looked at the numbers. It was a test. He wasn't threatening her body. He was challenging her mind. For the first time in her life, a man wasn't looking at her legs or her face, but at her utility. It was twisted, yes, but it was also strangely empowering. "I need a stylus," she said, her voice hardening. "And coffee. Black." Magnus's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. A flicker of amusement danced in his eyes. "The kitchen is fully stocked. Make it yourself." He turned and walked toward the north wing. "You have until morning, Thalia. Impress me." Thalia watched him leave. As soon as the heavy oak door clicked shut, she let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She looked around the glass cage. She went to the window and pressed her hand against the cold pane. She was a prisoner. Yes. But for the first time, she held the key to her own value. Her father had underestimated her. Magnus was testing her. She went to the kitchen, found the espresso machine, and brewed a cup that was dark as tar. She sat at the dining table, the tablet glowing in the dim light. She began to work. Hours passed. The city lights below flickered out one by one as the night deepened. But Thalia didn't stop. She dove into the labyrinth of her father's deceit. She found the shell companies in Panama. She found the crypto wallets disguised as vendor payments. But she found something else, too. Hidden in the metadata of the transactions was a recurring payment to a security firm, Blackline Solutions. She frowned. Blackline wasn't a bank. It was a private military contractor. Why was her cowardly father paying mercenaries? She dug deeper. The payments coincided with shipments. Not of money, but of hardware. Thalia froze. Her father wasn't just stealing money. He was smuggling weapons through Magnus's shipping lanes without Magnus knowing. If she told Magnus this, her father was a dead man. Truly dead. Tortured and executed. She stared at the screen. Her father, who had thrown her to the wolves to save his own skin. She felt a cold, hard stone form in her chest, where her heart used to be. At 6 a.m., the door to the north wing opened. Magnus emerged, dressed in a fresh suit, looking as if he hadn't slept, but was energized by the morning sun cutting through the blinds. He stopped at the table. He saw the empty coffee cup and Thalia, still sitting there, eyes bloodshot but alert. "Well?" he asked. Thalia spun the tablet around to face him. "He didn't just steal 4 million, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "He stole 12, and he's using your logistics network to run guns for the cartel in the South." Magnus froze. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. He looked at the data, scrolling through her work. His face was unreadable, but his knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the table. "You're selling out your own blood," Magnus murmured, looking up at her. "He sold me first," Thalia said. "I'm just balancing the ledger." Magnus looked at her for a long, silent minute. Then, a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It was predatory, terrifying, and beautiful. "You aren't collateral, Thalia," he said softly. "You're a revelation." 3 days later, the dynamic in the penthouse had shifted. It was subtle, like the change in atmospheric pressure before an explosion. Thalia wasn't locked in the East Wing anymore. Magnus had given her access to his study. He gave her files, actual business files, to review. He spoke to her not as a prisoner, but as a consultant. But the tension was there. It wasn't just intellectual. It was physical. When he walked past her, the air crackled. When their hands brushed as he handed her a document, the contact lingered for a fraction of a second too long. "Tonight," Magnus announced, walking into the living room while adjusting his cufflinks. "We have a dinner." Thalia looked up from a book she was reading. "We? The cartel representatives are in town. The ones your father was smuggling for. They are unhappy that I seized their shipment this morning based on your intel." "And you're taking me?" Thalia asked, incredulous. "I'm the one who exposed them." "Exactly. You are the message. Showing them I have the daughter of their former partner, and that she is loyal to me, is a power move. It shows total dominance." "I'm not loyal to you," Thalia shot back. "I'm just surviving." Semantics. Magnus waved a hand. There is a dress in your room. Put it on. Be ready in 20 minutes. The dress was emerald green silk, backless, with a slit that went up to her thigh. It fit like a second skin. It was armor masquerading as fashion. Thalia looked in the mirror. She looked dangerous. She applied dark red lipstick, her hand steady. The dinner was held at Vatra, an exclusive underground restaurant owned by the Fairchild family. The walls were raw brick, the lighting dim and amber. The tables were spaced far apart for privacy. Magnus sat at the head of the table. Thalia sat to his right. Opposite them sat 3 men. The leader, a man named Ortega, had eyes like a shark and a smile that didn't reach them. "Mr. Fairchild," Ortega said, slicing his steak with aggressive precision. "You seized property that belongs to us. We had an arrangement with Marcus." "Marcus was an employee who stole from me," Magnus said calmly, sipping his wine. "And you were trespassing on my infrastructure. Consider the seizure a tax for using my roads without paying the toll." Ortega's knife scraped screechingly against his plate. "And the girl? Marcus said she was soft." "Marcus was a fool," Magnus said, not looking at Thalia. "Thalia is entirely different." Ortega laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "We shall see. Maybe we take the shipment back. And maybe we take the girl as interest." The air in the restaurant vanished. Magnus didn't move, but Thalia saw the tension in his jaw. His hand moved imperceptibly toward his jacket pocket, but it happened too fast. The waiter approaching their table to refill the water wasn't a waiter. Thalia saw it in the reflection of her spoon. He was reaching into his serving towel, not for a bottle, but for a suppressed pistol. Magnus was focused on Ortega. He didn't see the waiter. Thalia didn't think. She didn't scream. She grabbed the steak knife from the table, heavy, serrated silver, and in one fluid motion, she stood and drove it into the waiter's extended forearm, pinning his hand to the heavy wooden serving cart. The gun clattered to the floor. The waiter screamed, a guttural sound of shock and pain. Chaos erupted. Magnus was on his feet instantly, his own weapon drawn, putting 2 rounds into Ortega's bodyguards before they could clear their holsters. Ortega scrambled back, overturning the table. Thalia didn't freeze. The waiter, despite the knife in his arm, swung his other fist at her face. She ducked, the wind of the blow ruffling her hair. She grabbed a heavy crystal decanter of wine and smashed it into the side of his head. He crumbled. Silence returned to the room, broken only by the whimpering of the waiter and the heavy breathing of the survivors. Magnus stood amidst the wreckage, gun smoking. He looked at the dead bodyguards, then at Ortega, who was cowering in the corner, held at gunpoint by Magnus's security team who had rushed in. Then Magnus turned to Thalia. She was standing over the unconscious waiter. Her chest was heaving. There was a splatter of wine, or blood, on her cheek. She was gripping the broken neck of the decanter like a jagged dagger. She looked wild, beautiful, and terrifying. Magnus walked over to her. He holstered his gun. He reached out and gently pried the broken glass from her shaking fingers. "I thought you were an accountant," Magnus whispered, his voice thick with adrenaline. "I told you," Thalia breathed, looking up at him, her eyes burning. "I survive." Magnus looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. He wasn't looking at a debt anymore. He wasn't looking at a punishment. He reached out and thumbed the spot of blood from her cheek. "No," Magnus said, a dark promise in his voice. "You don't just survive, Thalia. You conquer." He turned to his head of security. "Clean this up. Take Ortega to the basement, and get the car." He took off his suit jacket and draped it over Thalia's shoulders. The warmth of his body enveloped her. "Let's go home," he said. As they walked out of the restaurant, stepping over the debris, Thalia realized something terrified her more than the assassination attempt. She had enjoyed it. The rush, the power, the violence. And she knew, by the way, Magnus's hand rested possessively on the small of her back, that he knew it too. The punishment was over. The training had just begun. The basement of the spire was a world away from the glass-walled luxury of the penthouse. It was a concrete bunker, soundproofed and smelling of gun oil and cold sweat. This was Magnus's private sanctuary, a place where civilization was stripped away to reveal the brutality beneath. For the past 2 weeks, Thalia had barely seen the sun. Her life had become a grueling cycle of physical conditioning and psychological deconstruction. "Again," Magnus commanded. Thalia stood in the center of the sparring mat, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Sweat plastered her hair to her forehead. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she raised her fists. Magnus circled her. He wasn't wearing his usual bespoke suit. He was in a black t-shirt and tactical pants, moving with the predatory grace of a panther. "You're hesitating," he said, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "You're thinking about the pain before the impact. That's how you get killed." He lunged. It wasn't full speed. If it were, she would already be on the floor, but it was fast. Thalia tried to block, but she was a fraction of a second too slow. Magnus swept her leg, and the world tilted. She hit the mat hard, the air rushing out of her lungs. Before she could scramble away, Magnus was over her, pinning her wrists above her head with one hand. His weight was heavy, suffocating, yet grounding. "Dead," he whispered, his face inches from hers. His amber eyes burned with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Ortega's men won't stop because you're tired. They won't stop because you're a woman. They will tear you apart." Thalia grit her teeth, anger flaring hotter than her exhaustion. She bucked her hips, using the leverage he had taught her yesterday, and twisted her wrist against his thumb. It was a dirty move, desperate, but it broke his grip for a split second. She rolled, scrambling to her feet, and before he could fully rise, she aimed a kick at his midsection. He caught her ankle mid-air. Time seemed to freeze. Thalia balanced on one leg, staring at him. Magnus didn't throw her down this time. He held her leg, his hand sliding up her calf, feeling the muscle tense. "Better," he murmured, his voice dropping an octave. "You used my arrogance against me. Unexpected." He released her slowly. Thalia stumbled back, regaining her footing. The air between them was thick, charged with adrenaline and something darker, more magnetic. "I'm not a soldier, Magnus," she said, wiping sweat from her brow. "I'm an accountant who got lucky with a wine bottle. Luck is a finite resource. Skill is forever." Magnus walked over to a metal table and picked up a handgun, a matte black Sig Sauer. He checked the chamber and held it out to her, handle first. "Your father treated you like an asset to be liquidated. I am teaching you to be the hostile takeover." Thalia took the gun. It was heavier than she expected, cold and lethal. "Why?" she asked, looking up at him. "Why train me? You have an army of security. You have Elias." At the mention of his head of security, Magnus's expression tightened imperceptibly. "Trust is a liability, Thalia. Elias is loyal because I pay him well. The guards are loyal because they fear me. But you—" He stepped closer, closing his hands over hers to correct her grip on the weapon, his chest pressed against her back, his breath hot on her ear. She shivered, not from cold. "You have no one else," Magnus whispered. "The world has rejected you. Your father sold you. You are a ghost in the system. That makes you dangerous, and it makes you mine." Mine. The word hung in the air, possessive and absolute. "Aim," he commanded. Thalia raised the gun, targeting the silhouette at the end of the range. "Breathe out. Squeeze. Don't pull." She fired. The recoil jarred her arms, but the bullet hit the target. Not a bullseye, but a kill shot to the shoulder. "Again," Magnus said, his hand resting on her waist, steadying her. She fired again and again. With every shot, the image of her father's terrified face in the warehouse faded, replaced by the steel-eyed reflection of the woman she was becoming. Magnus watched her, his expression unreadable. He wasn't just forging a weapon, he was sculpting a partner, and for the first time in years, the icy control he maintained over his life felt like it was beginning to crack. He wanted to break her, yes, but not to destroy her. He wanted to break her open to see the fire he knew burned inside. "Enough for today," Magnus said abruptly, stepping away as if the proximity burned him. "Go shower. Tonight, we leave the bunker." Thalia lowered the gun, her hands trembling slightly from the exertion. "Where are we going?" Magnus turned at the door, the shadows obscuring his eyes. "To the masquerade. It's time to test if you can lie as well as you fight." The Gala of the Iron Circle was the most exclusive event of the underworld social calendar. It was held in a decommissioned cathedral, The Gothic architecture repurposed for a night of decadence and deal-making. High ceilings, stained glass, and a sea of masks hiding the faces of the city's most dangerous predators. Thalia wore midnight blue. The dress was velvet, clinging to every curve, with a neckline that plunged daringly low. Her mask was a delicate filigree of silver that covered the upper half of her face, leaving her lips exposed. She felt naked, despite the layers of fabric. But under her dress, strapped to her thigh, was a ceramic knife Magnus had given her, and in her clutch was a device designed to clone RFID signals. "Relax," Magnus murmured as he guided her up the stone steps. He wore a simple black domino mask, but his presence was unmistakable. He moved with a king's stride. "You are not Thalia Cross, the accountant. You are Elena Vance, my new consultant from Zurich. And if they recognize me," Thalia whispered, clutching his arm, "they won't. Nobody looks at the victim, Thalia. They only look at the victor. Tonight, you are with me. That makes you untouchable." They entered the main hall. The music was a haunting string quartet. Waiters moved like ghosts with trays of champagne. "Target is at 10 o'clock, Magnus said, his voice barely moving his lips. "Dmitry Volkov, Russian syndicate. He's holding the encryption keys for the new shipping routes on his phone. I need those keys." Thalia spotted Volkov. He was a bear of a man, laughing loudly, surrounded by sycophants. His phone was in the breast pocket of his tuxedo. "Distract him," Magnus said. "I will handle the rest." "No," Thalia said. Magnus paused, looking down at her. "Excuse me. If you approach him, his guard will go up. He knows your arrival. He doesn't know me." Thalia took a sip of champagne, her eyes sharpening. "I'll get the keys. You keep his security occupied." Magnus hesitated. It was risky, but he saw the calculation in her eyes. The same calculation she had used to find her father's hidden accounts. "You have 5 minutes," Magnus said. "If you're not back by then, I burn this place down to get you out." Thalia slipped away. She didn't approach Volkov directly. She circled the room, waiting until a waiter passed Volkov. As the waiter turned, Thalia accidentally bumped into him, sending a tray of drinks crashing onto Volkov's shoes. "You idiot!" Volkov roared, shoving the waiter. "Oh my God, I am so clumsy!" Thalia gasped, stepping into the chaos. She reached out to steady Volkov, her hand brushing his chest and the pocket. "I am so sorry, sir. Please, let me help." Volkov looked down, ready to explode. Then he saw her, the dress, the lips, the distress. His anger evaporated, replaced by a greasy charm. "It is fine, my dear," Volkov said, leering. "A beautiful woman is allowed a mistake." Thalia smiled, a shy, apologetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let me at least get you a napkin." She leaned in, her body pressing briefly against his. In that second, she slid the cloner from her palm, brushed it against his pocket, and waited for the single vibration confirming the data transfer. "Buzz. You are very kind," Volkov said, his hand moving to her waist. "Thalia!" A cold voice cut through the noise. Magnus was there. He wasn't looking at Volkov. He was looking at Volkov's hand on her waist with a murder in his eyes, so potent it could have stopped a heart. "Darling," Magnus said, his voice smooth as poisoned honey. "I've been looking for you. The car is ready." Volkov stiffened. He recognized Magnus. "Fairchild, I didn't know you had such exquisite taste." "She is not for you, Dmitry," Magnus said. He stepped between them, breaking Volkov's hold. She is the one thing in this room you cannot afford." He took Thalia's arm, his grip bruising. "We are leaving." They walked out, maintaining their composure until they reached the cool night air. The valet brought the car. As soon as the doors closed, Magnus turned on her. "You let him touch you," he growled. "I got the keys," Thalia countered, pulling the device from her clutch and tossing it into his lap. Mission accomplished. Magnus looked at the device, then at her. The anger in his eyes warred with pride, and something else. Lust. He grabbed her, pulling her across the leather seat until she was straddling his lap, his hands tangled in her hair, pulling her head back. "You played a dangerous game, little weapon," he murmured against her throat. I won, Thalia breathed, her heart hammering against his chest. Yes, Magnus admitted. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was acclaiming. It tasted of champagne and danger. Thalia kissed him back with equal ferocity, her hands gripping his shoulders. For a moment, they weren't boss and subordinate. They were two predators who had found their match. But the moment was shattered by the screech of tires and the shattering of glass. The rear window exploded inward. Down! Magnus roared, throwing his body over hers as the car swerved violently. Bullets hammered the side of the armored SUV like hail. The driver, one of Magnus's best, was shouting into the radio, but there was only static. We're jammed! The driver yelled. They knew the route! Magnus pulled Thalia up from the floor. His face was a mask of cold fury. Hold on! The car spun 180 degrees, the tires smoking, and sped down a narrow alleyway. The pursuit was relentless. Two black sedans with no plates were on their tail. Who is it? Thalia asked, clutching the door handle. Volkov? No, Magnus said, checking his clip. Volkov is a brute, but he's not organized enough for a jammer. This is a hit. A professional hit. The driver took a sharp turn, crashing through a chain-link fence and onto a lower service road. They gained a few seconds of lead. We can't go to the spire, Magnus said. If they know the route, they might control the building. The safe house? The driver asked. Compromised. If they have the comms, they have the locations. Magnus looked at Thalia. Do you trust me? A bit late for that question, she said, her voice shaking but her hand steady as she gripped the seat. Driver, head to the old port. Container 44. The car roared through the industrial district. They screeched to a halt between stacks of shipping containers. Out! Now! Magnus commanded. They bailed out of the car just as the pursuing sedans rounded the corner. Gunfire erupted immediately. Magnus returned fire, moving with terrifying precision. He took down the driver of the lead car, causing it to crash into a pile of crates. Run! He yelled to Thalia. She ran. She didn't look back. She navigated the maze of steel containers, her heels clicking on the pavement. She kicked them off and kept running barefoot. Magnus caught up to her, grabbing her hand. They weaved through the labyrinth until they reached a rusted blue container. Magnus punched a code into a hidden keypad behind a patch of rust. The doors hissed open. They scrambled inside, and Magnus hit the lock. The heavy steel doors slammed shut, sealing them in darkness. Emergency red lights flickered on. The container wasn't empty. It was a panic room. Monitors, a cot, a weapons cache, and a separate secure server. Magnus slumped against the wall, sliding down. Magnus! Thalia rushed to him. He was clutching his side. Blood was seeping through his fingers, staining his white shirt crimson. Just a graze, he gritted out. Ricochet. Thalia didn't listen. She tore his shirt open. It was a nasty gash along his ribs, bleeding freely but missing the vital organs. Where is the first aid kit? She demanded. Magnus pointed to a locker. Thalia grabbed it. Her hands, which had trembled in the warehouse weeks ago, were steady now. She cleaned the wound, applied the clotting agent, and bandaged him tight. Magnus watched her, his eyes heavy with pain, but sharp with intelligence. You're good at this, he whispered. I had to patch up my father after his bar fights, Thalia said bitterly. Skill is forever, right? She sat back, her hands bloody. Who did this, Magnus? They knew exactly where we were. They knew the jammer frequency. Magnus looked at the bank of monitors on the wall. He tapped a few keys, bringing up the security feed from the spire. The penthouse was swarming with armed men. They weren't looting. They were searching. And standing in the middle of the living room, giving orders to the intruders, was a man Thalia recognized. Elias, the head of security. The man Magnus had said was loyal because he was paid well. Elias, Magnus said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. He didn't just sell me out. He sold the keys to the castle. Thalia looked at the screen, then at Magnus. The king of the city was bleeding in a shipping container. His empire hijacked by his right-hand man. He thinks you're dead, Thalia said. He will wish I was. Magnus tried to stand, but winced. Stay down. Thalia pushed him back gently. You need to rest. We are safe here for now. We have nothing, Magnus said, a rare note of defeat in his voice. My accounts will be frozen. My men are either dead or turned. We are all alone. Thalia looked at the blood on her hands. Then she looked at the server rack humming in the corner. We aren't alone, she said. A cold, hard smile touched her lips, a mirror of the smile Magnus had given her in part 1. You have the deadliest weapon in the city. Magnus looked at her, confused. You have me, Thalia said. Elias knows your security protocols. He knows your soldiers, but he doesn't know me. He thinks I'm just a concubine, a victim. She stood up and walked to the computer terminal. She cracked her knuckles. He forgot about the accountant, she whispered. Rest, Magnus. By morning, I'm going to bankrupt that traitor and burn his world to the ground. Magnus watched her type, the red light of the screen illuminating her face. She wasn't the girl he had taken from the warehouse. She was a queen rising from the ashes. And for the first time, Magnus Fairchild was the one who was captivated. The shipping container was silent, save for the hum of the cooling fans on the server rack and Magnus's shallow, controlled breathing. He lay on the cot, his shirt discarded, the bandages stark white against his bruised skin. He wasn't asleep. His eyes were half open, watching Thalia. She had been typing for 3 hours straight. Elias was smart, Thalia murmured, her eyes darting across lines of code reflecting in her pupils. He didn't just seize the physical assets. He rerouted the liquidity to 3 offshore holding companies in the Cayman Islands. He thinks he's untraceable. He spent 10 years watching me, Magnus said, his voice raspy. He knows my banks. He knows your banks, Thalia corrected, her fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. He doesn't know mine, or rather, the ones I set up for my father before I realized he was a crook. She hit enter with a decisive click. What did you do? Magnus asked, trying to sit up. I didn't just freeze his accounts, Magnus. I didn't want to alert him yet. Thalia swiveled the chair around to face him. Her hair was messy, her dress torn at the hem, but she looked more powerful than she ever had in the penthouse. I inverted the flow. Every time he tries to pay his mercenaries, the men currently occupying your home, the money doesn't go to them. It goes to a charity for orphaned kittens in Switzerland. Magnus blinked. Then a low, dry chuckle escaped his lips, quickly cut off by a wince of pain. Kittens! I thought it added a nice touch of irony, but here is the kill shot. She tapped the screen. I just sent a fabricated message from Elias's private server to the mercenary captain. The message says that Elias plans to liquidate the team after the job is done to save money. Magnus's eyes widened. You're starting a civil war. Divide and conquer, Thalia said, standing up and walking over to him. She placed a hand on his forehead, checking his temperature. Her touch was cool and firm. His men won't fight for him if they think he's going to betray them. And when they turn on him, we strike. Magnus caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. I taught you how to shoot. I didn't teach you this. You taught me that survival isn't enough, Thalia whispered, leaning down until their foreheads touched. You taught me to win. She pulled away, her expression hardening. She walked to the weapons cache on the wall. She bypassed the handguns and reached for a subcompact MP5 and a tactical vest. Can you stand? She asked. Magnus grit his teeth and swung his legs off the cot. The pain was blinding, but his will was stronger. He stood, swaying slightly before locking his knees. I can stand. Good. Thalia tossed him a fresh magazine. Because the mercenary captain just replied to the fake message. He's angry. He's confronting Elias in the penthouse in 20 minutes. That's our window. Magnus looked at her, this woman wearing a ruined evening gown and a tactical vest, holding a submachine gun with the ease of a veteran. After you, Magnus said. The service elevator to the spire was offline, cut by Elias to prevent exactly what they were doing, but Thalia had found the override codes in the system backups. They ascended in darkness, the elevator shaft smelling of grease and ozone. There are 4 guards on the penthouse level, Magnus whispered, as the numbers climbed. If your distraction worked, 2 will be in the office with Elias and the captain. That leaves 2 at the door. I'll take the left, Thalia said. The elevator dinged softly, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. The doors slid open. The hallway was chaos. Shouting could be heard from the main office down the hall. Thalia's digital poison was working. The mercenaries were turning on their paymaster. But 2 guards still stood by the elevator, startled by its arrival. Magnus moved instantly, despite his wound. He surged forward, grabbing the barrel of the first guard's rifle and driving the stock into the man's throat. The second guard raised his weapon, aiming at Magnus's exposed back. Thalia didn't hesitate. She didn't think. She raised the MP5, the lessons from the basement bunker flooding her muscle memory. Breathe out. Squeeze. 2 shots. Pop, pop. The guard dropped, struck in the chest and visor. Magnus finished his opponent and looked back at her. There was no horror in his eyes, only a grim validation. She had crossed the line. She was one of them now. "The office," Magnus commanded. They moved down the hall, stacking up against the heavy oak doors of Magnus's study. Inside, they could hear Elias screaming. "You think I would betray you?" Elias's voice was high, panicked. "The money is gone, Elias," a deep voice boomed. "The mercenary captain, and the email says you're burning us." "I didn't send that." Thalia looked at Magnus. He nodded. Magnus kicked the door open. The room froze. Elias was behind the desk. The captain was pointing a desert eagle at him. 3 other mercenaries were scattered around the room. "Gentlemen," Magnus said, his voice calm, terrifyingly casual. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding your payroll." Elias went pale. You're dead." "I'm very hard to kill." Magnus stepped into the room, gun raised. "Captain, check your accounts. The money isn't gone. It's in an escrow account that releases only with my biometric signature. Kill him, and you get nothing. Stand down, and I double your fee." The captain looked from Elias to Magnus. It wasn't a hard choice. Magnus was a legend. Elias was a panicked thief. The captain lowered his gun. "We walk away? You walk away," Magnus agreed. The mercenaries holstered their weapons and filed out past Thalia, leaving Elias alone behind the massive mahogany desk. Elias looked at Magnus, then at Thalia. His eyes darted to the drawer of the desk. "Don't," Magnus warned. Elias didn't listen. He yanked the drawer open, pulling out a snub-nosed revolver. Magnus fired, but his wound slowed him down. His shot went wide, shattering the window behind Elias. Elias aimed at Magnus's chest. Thalia was faster. She sprinted across the room, not firing, but sliding across the polished floor. She kicked the chair out from under Elias just as he pulled the trigger. The bullet grazed Magnus's shoulder, sending him stumbling back. Elias crashed to the floor, losing his grip on the gun. He scrambled to reach it, but Thalia was already there. She stomped on his wrist, hearing the bone snap. Elias screamed. Thalia picked up the revolver. She stood over him, her chest heaving, her eyes cold. "You called me a concubine," Thalia said, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "You told the guards I was soft." "Thalia, wait!" Elias begged, clutching his broken wrist. "I can help you. You can't do anything," she interrupted. She looked at Magnus. He was leaning against the doorframe, blood seeping from his new wound, but he wasn't intervening. He was letting her choose. "Do it," Magnus said softly, "or he will come back." Thalia looked at the man who had destroyed their lives for greed. She didn't feel pity. She felt the weight of the gun, the finality of the decision. "You're fired," she whispered. She pulled the trigger. 3 weeks later, the spire had been repaired. The glass was new, the blood scrubbed from the floors. The city was quiet, terrified into submission by the story of Magnus Fairchild's return and the purge that followed. But the story wasn't just about Magnus anymore. It was about the woman at his side, the Iron Queen. They called her in the whispers of the underworld. Thalia stood on the balcony, the wind whipping her hair. She wore a white suit, sharp and tailored. No more victim, no more accountant. Magnus stepped out behind her. He had healed, though the scars would remain. He held 2 crystal glasses of whiskey. "To solvency," he said, handing her a glass. Thalia took it. "To interest," she replied, clinking the glass against his. They drank in silence, watching the city grid below. "Your father called," Magnus said casually. Thalia stiffened. "And?" "He heard rumors of your influence. He wanted to know if his debt was cleared. He wanted to know if he could come home." "What did you tell him?" "I told him the debt was transferred." Magnus turned to face her. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the contract Marcus Cross had signed, giving Thalia to Magnus. And I told him, Magnus continued, that the owner of the contract has decided to terminate the agreement. Magnus held up a lighter. He flicked the flame and touched it to the corner of the paper. They watched as the document curled into ash, carried away by the wind. You are free, Thalia, Magnus said. The debt is paid. The enemies are dead. You can go. You have your own money now. I made sure the commission from Elias's accounts was transferred to you. You can leave the city. You can be anyone. Thalia watched the last of the ash disappear. She looked at the door leading out of the penthouse, to the elevator, to the world below. A normal life. A safe life. Then she looked at Magnus, the monster who had saved her, the teacher who had forged her, the man who looked at her not with possession, but with awe. She set her glass down on the railing. You're bad at math, Magnus, she said, stepping closer to him. Am I? You forgot the interest, she said, placing her hands on his lapels. You invested in me. You trained me. You bled for me. If I leave now, you take a loss on that investment. Magnus's hand settled on her waist, pulling her flush against him. And what do you propose? A merger, Thalia whispered, rising on her tiptoes. A permanent partnership. Magnus smiled, the rare, genuine smile that only she ever saw. Be careful, Thalia, he warned, his lips brushing hers. Once you sign that contract, there is no exit clause. I don't need an exit, she said, pulling him down for a kiss that sealed their fate. I'm exactly where I belong. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't just a weapon. She was the hand that held the gun and the heart that beat within the beast. And together, they would burn the world down if anyone dared to touch what was theirs. And that, my friends, is how Thalia Cross went from a pawn to a queen. It's a classic dark romance trope, but with a twist. She didn't change him. She became him. The scene where she bankrupts the traitor while Magnus watches? Pure power, couple energy. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, revenge, and a romance sharp enough to cut glass, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done in Thalia's shoes? Would you have pulled the trigger or walked away? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss next week's story. Until then, keep your friends close and your enemies in your sights.